Hey everyone, this is Joe and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I want to talk about divine perfection. And this is a really deep topic. I'm going to do my best to talk about this in a way that makes sense to people. But I don't know how successful I'm going to be at that. So I can remember when I was a kid, my mom was a religious person, and she would always say things like, everything happens for a reason. And God has a plan. And I never liked this. This was always offensive to me because to me, this seemed like justification of suffering. The way I thought about this as a kid was that there's so much suffering in the world, and to say that everything happens for a reason and to say that God has a plan, it seems like you're just dismissing all this suffering, and it seems like you're taking an easy out and a shortcut. So if I tell you about suffering that's in the world, if I tell you that people are suffering, that animals are suffering, when I was younger, I was really passionate about like animal rights issues. And I'd be like, all these animals are suffering in these factory farms, and for you to just say that everything happens for a reason kind of seems like it's dismissing all this suffering. So this didn't make any sense to me. It seemed like taking the easy way out, and that was pretty much it. I completely dismissed it. And later on in my life, I had some profound spiritual experiences on psychedelics, which just completely changed my mind on this. And I came out of these experiences thinking that with a deep feeling that everything is perfect the way it is, that all of reality, the whole universe, everything, all of life, it's all perfect exactly the way it is, and everything happens for a reason. And this is the thing, is that this idea that everything happens for a reason, to be honest, I'm not even really sure my mom believed this, even though she would say it. But maybe she did. But what this experience showed me is that everything happens for a reason, not just the things you like. And this includes what you might call evil. This includes this includes everything. And the thing is, if you're offended by this, it's like, yeah, this is at face value offensive. It's like, get in line with everyone else who's offended by this. And if your first reaction to this is that you don't believe it, it doesn't make any sense to you, again, get in line with everyone else, because it's a very small percentage of people who are actually going to understand this and see the wisdom in this. That it really forces you to be humble, because the thing is, in life, we're very invested in our problems and our suffering, and we don't really even want to believe that our suffering is justified, because this is kind of a hit to our ego. So it really takes a lot of humility to say that something horrible that happened to us is actually perfect and actually happens for a reason. And so it's important. Generally speaking, I do think that divine perfection has to be experienced. It can't necessarily be explained, but I can try. So, the main thing to understand is that something I believe I heard Jordan Peterson say, which is that disorder at one level of analysis can be a part of order at a higher level of analysis. So, as a human, your body is composed of trillions of individual cells. And individual cells are biological entities in their own right. And I think, in my opinion, an individual cell probably has a primitive form of consciousness. I mean, why wouldn't it? It's a basic biological entity. So you got to think that a human being is not just one organism, but a human being is a whole community of organisms. And what that shows you is that it's possible for a collection of conscious entities to itself be conscious, which is very profound if you think about it. So, but at the cellular level, there's disorder is happening all the time. So our cells are constantly dying off. And so if my hypothesis is correct that individual cells are conscious, then death at the cellular level is actually important for a human body to be healthy. So for you to be healthy as a human, your cells have to be dying off all the time. So if it's true that an individual cell has a primitive form of consciousness, then basically what this is these individual cells would be experiencing suffering, but that suffering would be part of a greater meaning that an individual cell is incapable of understanding. And if it's true that an individual cell is conscious and an individual cell experiences pain, then individual cells experience pain all the time, which to them doesn't seem justified, but which actually is justified. Now, if it's true that an individual cell is part of a greater picture, which is more beautiful and more complex and more meaningful than an individual cell could ever contemplate with its primitive form of consciousness, what we next need to realize is that human consciousness, while more advanced than a cell, is also finite. And we could imagine that a human being is part of a bigger consciousness, which is far more beautiful and far more complex, and far more meaningful than a human being could ever possibly understand. And that we take our human problems seriously, but at the end of the day, human problems are disorder at one level of analysis, which is the human level of analysis. But is it possible that there is a higher level of analysis? Is it possible that human beings are cells within a much larger organism, and that our suffering is part of a natural and necessary process of that higher organism? And if you extend this all the way out, I think that the whole universe is an organism, and that we're just cells within that organism. And there may be many levels to this. So, I don't think that it just goes human beings and then it's the whole universe. I think it's like you have cells, then cells make up organs, then organs make up organ systems, then organ systems make up the human body. But then the human body is part of the human species, and then the human species is part of all of life on planet Earth. And then it could go on at levels we're just not capable of seeing. So this is what I would call divine perfection, is the divine and sacred realization that all of reality is perfect, exactly the way it is. And everything that you think is a problem, it's a problem at your level of analysis. It's a problem for you, but it's not ultimately a problem. And while this is offensive at face value, the truth is that this is actually meant to help you, not to hurt you. So the purpose of this is not to justify suffering. The purpose of this is to reconcile suffering. That when you understand this, it actually provides true healing. And when you actually truly realize this, when you truly realize divine perfection, you realize that divine perfection is the only true healing, because any other form of healing is finite. Yeah, you can temporarily alleviate your suffering, but that's not going to last forever. Suffering is going to come back. And the only true healing is realizing that everything is perfect. And that this is the true nature of things, and that actually the experience of human life is forgetting perfection and truly believing that reality is imperfect. But ultimately, maybe through death, we will all eventually wake up to the truth of divine perfection. And this is not meant to hurt you. This is meant to heal you. But while that's true, it's not really my job or my position to start getting specific about this and to try to apply divine perfection to someone else's suffering. That ultimately only you can do that. Only you can have this realization and apply that to your own suffering. There is no value in me going around and getting specific about other people's problems and telling you really it's all perfect. This is just going to generally offend people, and it's also you can't realize this for anyone else. This is something only you can realize this. I can't realize it for you. So it's only my position to apply this to my problems. And that for me, I believe that any bad thing that's ever happened to me, that ultimately is part of a greater meaning, which is more beautiful than anything which I'm generally capable of understanding. And maybe the only time you can kind of get a glimpse of it is when you have one of these experiences. I think another aspect to this is that there's sort of a sacred pleasure which is part of this divine perfection, which is that part of this is that reality is fundamentally made out of consciousness. And consciousness technically only ever does one thing, which is that it pursues pleasure and it avoids pain. But these are really kind of the same thing, right? And it may do this in very twisted ways. It may do this in very weird counterintuitive ways. But the truth is that the only thing consciousness has ever done is tried to pursue pleasure. And when you realize that, you realize that the whole universe is really, it's made out of consciousness, and it is pursuing pleasure, and that's the only thing it's ever doing. And when you truly realize that, it's just like the biggest party, the biggest celebration that you could imagine. That really, this is what reality is. It's a celebration. It's a cosmic celebration. That when you realize this is, celebration on Earth is limited. Because, you might be celebrating that something happened, but it's not going to last forever. And you're not celebrating with everyone. And certain people are welcome at the party, and certain people are not. And then the party has an end to it. And then you have to go back to work. It's a finite thing, right? But this divine celebration is not finite. It's all encompassing. And that ultimately realizing it goes along with it's the realization of divine perfection, with also the realization that the only thing the universe ever does is pursue pleasure, and that ultimately it's this just cosmic celebration, which is just going to completely knock you off your feet. And yes, it's a little bit offensive. But you know what? Reality is a little bit offensive. Like, reality is not politically correct. Reality doesn't share all of your biases. Divine perfection is ultimately the greatest thing that a human being can experience. But very few people will, most likely. I know this was probably a little bit rambling, and I think also deserves additional videos, but I hope this was useful to someone. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video.